Start. Hi there, everybody. I hope you're well. My name is Gregory Weissman, and I'm with the Office of Grants Management. I'm joined by my colleagues Yamisi and Stewart, who are with the Department of General Services, who is the responsible department for this program. And again, this is the kickoff information session for fiscal year 26 cost sharing capital grants program. I now see in the title that grants is repeated twice. Before this is published, I will fix that title. But if you're listening to this as a recording, please don't hesitate to reach out for any questions. I have my colleagues on the line to answer more specific technical questions, but I'm going to go through the presentation and then publish this recording after. And Yamisi and Stewart are going to ping me if there's any issues with the presentation, or if my slides freeze, or if my sound cuts out. But again, my name is Greg Weissman with the Office of Grants Management for this kickoff informational session for awardees for this grant program. This is the agenda for today. First of all, congratulations on winning the award. I know that a lot of times the county process can be a little opaque and mysterious, but throughout this presentation, we're going to discuss why your application won, a grant agreement overview, details on reporting and payment requirements and timelines, the amendment process, the multi-year award renewal process, walking through key documents and tools, and then again, we'll have a time at the end to answer questions. But if there are no questions, please don't hesitate to reach out at any time to myself or your grant monitor or the responsible department during implementation. A little background on the scoring process. 3 Montgomery County government staff members reviewed and scored the 9 total applications. The reviewers included a manager within the administrative department, DGS, as well as a Department of Transportation program specialist and an analyst within the Office of Management and Budget, OMB. Each application was independently reviewed and scored 3 individual times, resulting in a total of 27 reviews. And reviewers provided scores of up to 100 points, shaped around the preset criteria, which was in the Notice of Funding Opportunity, the NOFO. They also provided an overall recommendation on whether to fund or not fund the proposal, an assessment on the organization's ability to serve underserved populations, which was listed as a priority in the NOFO, an assessment on whether the proposed project filled the county gap or not, and recommendations on alternative funding amounts if necessary. The OGM ranking process was very straightforward for this program. A lot of times we have to do a rescaling of scores if we have certain reviewers not look at every application, but because we only had 9 applications, all 3 Montgomery County reviewers could look at each application, so we did not have to do that. So we just took the average scores, and then that led us to an overall funding recommendation. The resource allocation process, funding award amounts were set at average of funding levels recommended by reviewers, with some modification based on the availability of funds. The Office of Grants Management confirmed that the target population cited in the application was the actual focus target populations of said application, and OGM worked from the highest to lowest average scores, allocating funding from the appropriate funding category, not arts versus non-arts, until all funding categories were exhausted. In terms of the award approval process, if you've worked with the county before on grants, this has been pretty straightforward and consistent. But just to review, applicants submitted applications through UNA, and then OGM conducted an initial review, and then we sent the grant package for review and signature. We're currently still waiting on about half of the awardees to submit revised application materials based on the notification letters that were sent, I believe, on December 24th of 2025. Number 7, the box highlighted in red, is where the ones who have submitted applications, who have resubmitted applications and signed their awards, that's where they are. They're currently with the Chief Administrative Officer for the final signature. Once that is finally signed, we will send back to the recipient a fully executed grant agreement. Once we do that, we will process a direct purchase order for said grant agreement through the Department of Finance. OGM will email a copy of the approved DPO to the recipient, but please note that payments cannot be processed until the DPO is approved. This is a county policy, so as you can imagine, we are bound by the limits of working in a county government in a bureaucracy. So even if everything is ready to go, you are ready to implement, we cannot process a payment until we have an approved DPO. But please do not worry, we are moving as fast as we can per usual to get these processed. If any stakeholder finds an issue that requires changes, we'll have them resubmit application materials in UNA, and we will go from there. Please do not begin implementation on this project until you have a finalized grant agreement signed by all parties in hand. If you do begin work, that is at the risk of the recipient. Getting the signatures at this stage is pretty much a formality, but it is a necessary formality that we must attend to. A brief overview of the grant agreement, where you'll see a lot of your key information, who your grant monitor is, what your grant agreement number is, the reporting and payment schedule, the period of performance, that's all on the cover sheet. So a lot of questions that grantees come to me with are answerable by reviewing the cover sheet, so please do so. Page 2 has a list of attachments, which is, I believe, the budget narrative, and the project performance plan, as well as the order of authority on page 2, which lists the order of authority of documents, which trumps the others if there's a conflict between different documents. So if your budget and performance plan say 2 different things, we will go back to that order of authority and see which has the greater authority over the others. The next few pages of a grant agreement contains key data elements, which specifically define roles, terms, standards, processes, and timelines for various aspects of your award implementation. Then there's a signature page, which has 3 signatures, one from the partner, one from the Office of the County Attorney, and then one from either the Office of Grants Management or the Chief Administrative Officer of the county. If an award is $100,000 or higher, it must be signed by the Chief Administrative Officer. So that is an extra step we must obtain the signature for. So if your award is over $100,000, there may be, this process may take 1 to 2 days longer than if your award is under $100,000. And then following the signature page is the general conditions. These are more general and inflexible requirements for all county grant agreements. If we want to change those, that is a long process that involves the Office of the County Attorney, but we heavily recommend that awardees review those very carefully, as you are signing a document that confirms your organization's adherence to those general terms and conditions. But again, they are standard across all county grant agreements. Going into the specific data elements, these are what I talked about starting on page 2. The grant agreement award amount, pretty clear, it defines the amount awarded. The grant agreement scope, it summarizes and defines the broad scope of the grant agreement. This is tied to specific application materials. This section also affirms the role and authority of the Chief Administrative Officer or their designee. It defines who the grant monitor and administrator are and what their roles are, the payment method and schedule, grant agreement compliance, what the authorized budget is, and we're going to go through amendment later on in the presentation, allowable costs. Speaking of amendment, it details the requirements for an amendment. Given these are grants, we don't process an amendment if $1 is changed. There are certain thresholds by which an amendment is required, so please review section 9 carefully. The term of the grant agreement, which is also repeated on the cover page. A clarification that amendments must be mutually approved by both the county and the recipient to be effective. Non-liability, which removes liability from the county for grant implementation. Details on notices, refunds, termination, audit and records, rights of visitation and inspection, reporting and evaluation. Please review these carefully before signing the grants agreement, and please do not hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. It is much easier for OGM and DGS to address any questions before signature than after. And finally, for the data elements information disclosure, additional grant agreement conditions, and name and signature requirements. Again, these are pretty standard across all county grant agreements. If you worked with the county on other programs, you can compare these agreements to each other, and you'll find that they're pretty similar with some slight variations depending on the responsible department, in this case, DGS. In terms of payment and reporting, as you'll see on page 1 of your grant agreement, these agreements provide an upfront payment equal to 30% of the award total at the start of the grant term. And again, an approved DPO is required before a payment can be processed. Even if you submit an invoice, if you have not received an approved DPO, we will sit on that invoice until a DPO is approved. Future payments are tied on a cost reimbursable basis. And again, this is detailed in the data elements section, I believe number 5. Yes, number 5, the payment method and schedule. The goal of the upfront payment and reimbursement payment system is to have partners spending county funds to implement programs instead of having to rely on spending their own funds and waiting for reimbursement, which often can take months after incurring the expense. Given these are large capital projects that require heavy upfront expenses, we are providing 30% upfront. And then moving forward, those are the payments are provided on a cost reimbursable basis. And that is through the Department of General Services through your grant monitor. This approach significantly addresses equity issues and funding, as many underserved community-based organizations do not have the reserves or credit lines to take on huge reimbursable awards that are 100% reimbursable. Grants do not need to submit copies of invoices, timesheets, and other proof of expenditures for the first payment, but please note that they are required per the term of Section 5 of the grants agreement. And also, grantees must retain these records for a period of up to 3 years. So if next year, even if your grant period is done, if Stuart or Yemisi have a question saying, I have a question, I need a receipt for this one taxi ride that you took in 2025, per the terms agreed to in the signed grant agreement, the onus is on the awardee to provide that information. And please note that the grant agreement allows the grant monitor to audit award finances and make site visits at will. Please let us know if you have any questions on the payment schedule or the requirements. Here's an example of a reporting and payment schedule that is typical to this grant program. It's a 2-year period of performance with a 30% upfront payment with an approved DPO. This is an example based on an award that's worth an even $100,000. So once an approved DPO is processed, we will automatically process an invoice for $30,000, and then future invoices are tied to the requirements under Section 5 of your grant agreement. And again, your specific grant agreements reporting and payment schedule is on page 1, the cover sheet of your grant agreement. Just repeating this again, but for the initial upfront payment, there are some requirements. The main one is to have an approved DPO. You must also either attend or watch this information session that I'm providing right now. A lot of the questions you may have are already in this, and you must submit a request for grant payment or an invoice that meets county invoice standards for the exact amount listed for the payment in the grants agreement to your grant monitor. If the invoice is off by 1 cent to the amount described on the cover page of your grants agreement, it will be rejected by the Department of Finance and the process will have to start all over again. No programmatic or financial reporting is required, expected, or possible at the outset for this first payment. All you need is a signed grants agreement and an approved DPO. The grant agreement provides the county the right to audit how these funds were spent and requires a refund if they are not fully spent by the end of the grant agreement or have been misspent. So even though there is no report required for the upfront 30%, if later on the county has questions and then those questions are answered in an unsatisfactory way, or they're answered in a way that sheds light on county funds being misspent, the county is within its right to process a refund and get those funds back. I see a question. Do you know how long these processes take about approving a DPO? I've been with the county since June of 2025, and usually when we submit a DPO with everything signed, so that includes the signed grant agreement, signed by all parties, including the chief administrative officer, that process takes between 2 to 3 business days. Don't hold me to that. This is still a local government bureaucracy. I come from the federal level, which is a much bigger bureaucracy, but these are government systems that take time. If we have a holiday or a day off, or there is a delay, if there's an issue with your documents, the whole process has to start all over again. But I would say from the time we submit the DPO request to when the DPO is approved, it takes between 2 to 3 business days. But that is not a hard deadline. But the finance teams worked very hard to get these answered, to get these processed as soon as possible. But again, the process, if there's any issue with the signature, let's say you put the wrong date. I've seen grantees sign an award and then say they signed it in a year, 2062 rather than 2026. That grant agreement will have to be re-signed and re-returned, and then the DPO process will have to start all over again. So please make sure everything is in order per the instructions before we get to that stage, because then that will ensure we can do our jobs much quicker. For a request for grant payment and invoice standards, again, this is under Section 5 of the grant agreement. All grant payments will require an invoice or a request for grant payment to receive a disbursement of funds. An invoice that meets the following minimum county standards by including the invoice number, invoice date, legal name of the organization, vendor payment mailing address, which must match your DPO address, the itemization of goods and services being billed, total amount due, and direct purchase order number. If you have questions about payments beyond the initial payment, please direct those to your grant monitor or the responsible department, which in this case is the Department of General Services. If your organization does not issue invoices or you choose not to use an invoice, you may use the OGM's request for grant payment template, but Stuart or Missy will tell you, if you ask them for a template, they will provide one. And awardees are, as I said, awardees are required to submit requests for grant payments to the grant monitors listed on their awards cover page. Before seeking payment, please ensure that your registration with the Montgomery County Central Vendor Registration System is current with the correct address that matches your other records. Your department is in good standing with the Maryland State Department of Assessment and Taxation. Before every payment, the Department of Finance will check those, and regardless of whether you have since applied for reinstatement for good standing or have since updated, if when they check the system, it is not approved, they will just reject the invoice, send it back, and we have to start the process over again. So please, before submitting an invoice, you did this at the application stage, but please double check these systems to ensure that they are accurate and up to date. Please understand that payments may take up to 30 business days to be received after the grant monitor has confirmed your reporting needs meets required standards. So it is not 30 days after your report submission. If your grant monitor does not confirm that the invoice is approved, then that clock does not start. And again, this is 30 business days. OGM recommends that organizations sign up for ACH payments via CVRS to expedite receipt of funds, but if that's not possible, we are always happy to mail paper checks. For the amendment process, do we have I see a question came in. Do you have a sense of how long we should expect for the signature process to be completed, assuming the grantee receives over $100,000? Again, once I submit something, and again, this is based on my own experience, there's no hard deadline. But for example, I just got 3 agreements back from the Office of the County Attorney yesterday, and then the same day I submitted those to the Chief Administrative Officer for approval. Once that is submitted, it takes also about 2 to 3 business days for the Chief Administrative Officer or their designee to send me back a fully executed agreement. We share that with the partner, and then simultaneously we submit a DPO approval request. So because those were submitted yesterday, I would assume by the end of this week, I will have signed agreements back, and then we will have approved GPOs early to mid next week to start payments. I hope that answered your question, but please don't hesitate to ask in a different way if I did not. For the amendment process, grant agreements allow for amendments at the mutual agreement of your grantor and grantee. So these are flexible. We allow lots of changes, whether that's extending the term of the grant agreement, changing the approved budget without adding new funds. So if you're switching the budget category, or we can add new funds, changing the other portions of the project scope, or a combination of several or all of the above. I have seen a wide variety of amendments in my time at the county, but the one thing that stays constant is the amendments do not take effect until both the county and the partner have a signed amendment. Similar, and if the funding amount is changed, so if you get $100,000 and we give you $100,001, you will need a new DPO because that DPO is tied to the exact funding amount. If you were just changing the period of performance or where the funds are spent, you will not need an approved DPO, but please reach out with any questions. If seeking an amendment, the grantee must propose the amendment 30 days before the changes would take place. So if you say, hey, we want to process an amendment for costs that were incurred a year ago, that will be extremely difficult / not possible. So we encourage partners to plan ahead as much as possible. If the grantor / recipient agrees to consider an amendment, if the grantor / county, if we agree to consider an amendment, the grantee must provide updated versions of the grant agreement attachment that will change. So if you want to change your budget categories, if you want to change your period of performance, please provide updated copies of those documents that were submitted with your application and that make up your final award. If everything looks good, OGM will develop a grant agreement amendment that includes all the agreed upon changes to be signed by the grantee and the Chief Administrative Officer if the award is over $100,000. Once the grant agreement amendment is signed by both parties, yourself and the county, the grantee may begin shifting operations to match those changes. Unless funds are being added to a grant agreement, an updated DPO is not necessary, which I already covered. If you have any questions about this, it's always better to ask ahead of time than not. There's no such thing as a bad question. If you ask something that's in this presentation, I will answer politely, but then I will remind you that it's in the presentation. But we prefer, and I know my DGS colleagues agree as well, that we prefer questions come in sooner rather than later so we can address those in a timely manner. As you know, these are multi-year awards with 2 years of period of performance. But they are funded from only one fiscal year. So the appropriation for this program is from fiscal year 26, and your grant agreement will be funded by the fiscal year 26 resources which the County Council has approved. Each new fiscal year of funding will require a new grant agreement. So in some of your notification letters, it indicated that for fiscal year 26, you'll receive X number of dollars, and fiscal year 27, you'll receive X number of dollars. That fiscal year 27 will require a new grant agreement, a new DPO, new award supporting documentation, and we will be in touch once that process is upcoming and once the County Council has appropriated those funds. As I said, each fiscal year is planned to fund 24 months of the awarded project. If your grant notification letter only has funding for fiscal year 26, then that is the funding that your award has been allocated and you are not expected to receive additional funding. But please note, if you were awarded multi-year funding, that is contingent on council appropriations and satisfactory project performance. Let's say something goes sideways next year and the county council does not appropriate funding for this program, then there is no funding for this program and there's nothing we can do. In my short time at the county, I have not seen this. Usually the county council is aware how programs are funded for multi-year awards, and they will not back out of that, but it is not a commitment. And we follow the whims of the Maryland taxpayer, which provides direction to the county council. The award size could increase and we would process an amendment. That's happened. And again, if the project is not performing well, if the grantee is not allowing us site visits, if the organization fails to stay in compliance, funding may not be renewed and existing grant agreement could be canceled mid-fiscal year. Grant monitors and other county stakeholders will make this assessment, but please make sure you're responding to your grant monitor or the Office of Grants Management with questions as they arise. I went through that presentation very quickly, and this is the end of it, but this will be published online. But if you have further questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to either myself or the Department of General Services, which is Stewart or Yamisi for this program. Usually OGM handles the administrative questions about the application or the award, and the technical questions are answered by the responsible department, in this case, the Department of General Services. But if you're not sure who would answer it, feel free to email us both. And again, we prefer questions coming in sooner rather than later. So with that, I'm going to conclude the presentation. I'm going to see if we answered all of the questions. Let's see how long DPO processes take. I see your questions, and I recognize the names of those who have answered those questions, and I think you should see movement on your award soon. And I apologize for the delays. Definitely the recent weather and us closing the county for a day last week has delayed certain things, but we are seeing movement on these awards. But please don't hesitate to reach out for any questions. Either myself or the Department of General Services will answer as soon as possible. I'm going to conclude the presentation now, and thank you for your time.